Thank you, friend. Shabbat Shalom. In these trying times, we are confronted by the continuing horrors of Hamas and terror from Gaza, chaos in the Ukraine, the rampage of ISIS in Iraq. And friends, my heart goes out to James Foley's parents for their shocking loss. And of course, closer to home, the near anarchy in Ferguson. Do you remember when the worst thing that seemed to be happening was the banning of Working Class Hero for its use of certain words? My God, what a world we are living in. Now, congratulations do go out to Rachel and Daniel on their marriage, and this week Joanna and Walls will be getting married on Sunday, and I look forward to seeing you both then. The summer is winding down, and the school season will be upon us before you know it, and the start of school is the start of pretty well everything in North America. And in case anyone hadn't realized it, this was the coldest summer in our part of the world in 80 years. Now, we're only a few weeks away from the High Holy Days, and that means we're only a few weeks away from completing the Torah. And friends, please congratulate yourselves, because I'm congratulating you for joining me on this journey of discovery. And I know that for some of you, it's the first time you've actually ever gone through the entire Torah. It wasn't so bad now, was it? The highway is for gamblers. Better use your sense. Take what you have gathered from coincidence. And it's not a coincidence that this week we once again have a very apropos parsha to what's going on in life as we explore Re'eh, see. Now, when I was younger, I always thought the I Ching was the Book of Changes. But I see that it's really Deuteronomy that's the Book of Changes. As I said, we are really at the tail end of the Torah now. There are only a few parshas left. We are still in the midst of Moses' farewell address. And this parsha opens with a reminder of that incredible series of blessings and curses that we saw before. The blessing is for listening to the commandments of God, and the curse is for naught. There are two mountains mentioned. The blessing goes on Mount Gerizim, and the curse on Mount Ebal. So what does this mean? Is God placing a blessing and a curse on mountains? No. These mountains are to house stela, with the blessings and curses carved on them. And friends, the location is quite interesting. Near the oaks of Moreh. This happens to be the first place that God appeared to Abraham. In fact, it's the first place that God appeared to anyone. And it is where he made the promise of giving land to Abraham's descendants. The wheels on the bus go round and round. God is wrapping up his instructions to Moses, who is wrapping up his instructions to the people. There is still much repetition and much clarification and many changes. And another group of significant changes take place in this parsha. The emphasis on there being only one place for worship changes a whole bunch of rules. The centralization of the religion to the temple in Jerusalem is a huge shift. But friends, what it was in reference to was in terms of ritual. It had to do with sacrifice. Otherwise, we'd have a hard time explaining multiple temples in every age since the destruction of the Second Temple. You see, God puts his name on places but can't live in one place. He's not like the genie in Aladdin, all-powerful with an itty-bitty living space. He's all-powerful but can't be housed in any one place. The belief was God could not be contained in the entire universe. So how can a structure be built by humans to house him? Well, he sets his name to be contained in a structure. And so it says in this parsha, he sets his name. And so the divine name becomes a type of tangible entity. And the visible presence of God is tied to an object, be it the tent of meeting or the ark. That is why you can pray anywhere. But certain rituals had to take place only in one spot from this point forward. And of course, the ritual affected the most was regarding animal sacrifice. See, in the past, sacrifice and eating and the sacredness of the meal were all connected. In the past, we participated in holiness when we ate meals. There was no such thing as slaughter. The meal was sacred because it included reverence for the animal's life and affirmed the belief in the unity of God. That's gone. And unfortunately, when put certain ways, horrible things become holy. And unfortunately, we still see this today, not just with animals, but with man and his interpretations of things. This was the beginning of eat as much meat as you want. And of course, today that's become eat as much of everything, meat, sugar, and genetically modified foods as you want. And of course, this move towards centralization brought another huge shift in the cult. With a central sanctuary for sacrifice, it became practically impossible to carry a large quantity of agricultural produce. And so a system was put in place to convert the tithed produce into silver, which would be reconverted at the sanctuary into either a comestible animal or agricultural produce, and therefore the need for money changers in the temple. But that too is another story. And we are reminded of the lists of allowable and forbidden foods, and there is a really strange rule in Deuteronomy 14:21 where we are told that food we are not allowed, we should give it to the alien who is in your gates. But earlier we are told the alien is to be treated the same. Friends, these are the things that cause us some consternation. And boy, there's a lot of confusion in the animals and what they really were. But what the rules seem to suggest, more than anything, is that there is to be no consumption of predators or scavengers. You see, friends, we approximate what we think the animal being referred to was in translation. So be aware. The forbidden food is not necessarily what the Bible says in English. We just don't know what some of these animals actually were. We are so prone to what psychologists call the illusion of truth effect. We hear something enough, we simply believe it to be true. And that's really the case with these forbidden foods. And one of the most famous examples of this is something that's repeated in this particular parsha. You shall not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Friends, this was repeated from an earlier law, and we've repeated it enough that we have made it the reason for not having milk with meat. I'll remind you that the kashrut rules are rabbinic. They are not Torah rules, they're rabbinic rules. And in earlier parts of the Torah, in Exodus and Leviticus and Numbers, the rules were slightly different. This is the book of changes. And this rule was not actually associated with food per se. But in this parsha, it has been inexorably connected to the food rules. We have forgotten that it was about the barbarity of wiping out a family and having no compassion for animals and birds. It was a moral law made into a food law. It was about not killing a whole family of animals together. And it was turned into a food law, and it's been done by the illusion of truth. I'm not telling you to go and have a cheeseburger, but nowhere in the Torah does it say to not mix milk with meat. We love filling in the blanks and finishing things to give reality to thoughts. Our brains are efficient, but not necessarily smart. But I've gotten off track of what I really want to talk about. You see, friends, this is actually the economic section of Deuteronomy. As Polonius counsels his son in Hamlet, neither a borrower nor a lender be. And this parsha specifically is about that. It tells us to lend and not to borrow. But it is really referring to the bank of goodwill. It talks of giving to the poor, the disenfranchised, the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Because when we do, friends, it is like storing up a treasure that we draw down on later. When we can use it, when we need it. And there's a reference to the fact that the acts of ancestors pay off for the current generation. Again, friends, this is about the bank of goodwill. We are to help the indigent. It is mandated. And the nation shall be a lender and not a borrower. You shall not shut your hand from your brother. We are to give freely, and we are blessed by God in so doing. We don't. We simply don't. As a result, there will always be poor, but they must be cared for. It will take effort on the part of humanity to end indigence. It won't go away by itself. But we're not there yet. We are not that sophisticated. The rules also called for loan forgiveness or remission every 7 years, and you were forbidden from withholding from someone in need because the seventh year was coming. And friends, Hebrew slaves got freedom every 7 years. And when they were freed, you were to give them freely from your goods. They don't go away empty-handed. Now, we had questions in the past about slavery. This is not about the taking of slaves in conquest or in a slave trade like we think about. Not the immoral, cruel slave trade we all saw in Rome, in the United States, and in Africa. This business about Hebrew slaves was about those who had come upon bad times, as we've talked about before, and had to sell themselves into slavery or debt bondage as a result of loss of land. This was the automatic mechanism for getting freedom back. There were other types of slaves, non-Hebrew slaves, and the rules regarding them were quite different. They were treated like we think of slaves. They could be bought, sold, inherited, born into slavery, and treated in a not very nice way. And friends, it is so hard to think of a people who had experienced slavery and this kind of treatment treating anyone in that fashion. But that too is a discussion for another day, as we are reminded again about the holiday that defined the Torah, Passover. We are reminded that it is about eating the bread of degradation. There's that word again, the word of Yom Kippur, to degrade ourselves, to bring down. And the centralization changed this holy day too. See, Passover had been the one home ritual that everyone would, carry out at home. But with the shift to centralization, it changed. And blood on the lintel became centralized. But it was still always to be a holiday to be observed by you and your servants and the alien, the widows and the orphans. There's that protection of the weak members of society and inclusiveness of strangers again that we are so used to seeing. And friends, don't forget, membership in the tribe was based not upon converting, but based upon observation of Passover. And what's interesting is now the Levites are included in this group, because with the centralization of the temple, there was less ability for Levite priests in various outside communities to rely on the kindness of strangers. Now, one of the great difficulties of this parsha, my friends, is the level of extremes which it presents. We are told to kill dreamers and prophets and to utterly destroy the places that are taken over and where pagan worship took place. And what happens if the Israelite nation slips and turns towards other gods? But this is a part of historic reality. The Israelite religion did take over places of Canaanite worship and adapt them to the worship of the God of Israel. Abraham actually did the same and erected pillars to God where he went. As Christianity spread throughout Europe and then in the New World, it followed the same practice. The great Aztec temple in Mexico City is buried beneath the Spanish cathedral. And man has turned towards other gods, as he's made money and power and gold a god to him. So where does the be generous to your brothers and sisters fit in? Friends, we are all brothers and sisters. So reach out to everyone you can. Do not shut your hand from them. Do not harden your heart. As we approach the end of the Torah, things have changed. Everything in Deuteronomy reminds the people of when they were slaves in Egypt, as if the current exiles were like slaves. Very little goes back to the patriarchs. We escaped slavery and are given rules on freeing our slaves. We are told to be generous and protect the weak, while we are instructed to utterly destroy and kill. Friends, the original rules were written to keep in mind the sacredness of life, all life. A sacrifice is a sacred meal, and animals' lives can't be taken in a thoughtless way. If you wanted meat, Leviticus told us you had to go to the tabernacle. Instead, Deuteronomy allows secular slaughter. Meat for the sake of eating meat, and the restrictions on type changed radically. As George Harrison wrote, "You know that what you eat you are, but what is sweet now turns so sour. We all know obla di bla da, but can you show me where you are?" Friends, do you know where you are? I hope that I am following the bank of goodwill. It's hard to sometimes reconcile how this book fits in with some of the rules we've read, But it's all about interpretation, friends. We've talked about the need for interpretation and commentary and observation. Blessings to you all. Thank you for joining me. A few more weeks and you will have completed the Torah. I am so proud of you, and I hope you are proud of yourselves. Love you all. Shabbat Shalom.